You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, conversations with the icons of our time.
We let the fact that we argue over the means to a goal blind us to the power we have inherent in the fact that we agree on the goal. Instead, we're so busy bitching at one another.
Author Marianne Williamson. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. The entry of Vice President Kamala Harris into the 2024 presidential race has energized and invigorated millions of American women. Could it be the culmination of a societal shift that some people saw coming 30 or more years ago? Well, back in 1993, author and speaker and political candidate Marianne Williamson wrote a book about the changing landscape of American society. In her book called A Woman's Worth, Williamson sought to clarify the critical role that women could and should play in driving the betterment of our world. This was actually the first of several conversations that she and I had in coming years. So here now from 1993, Marianne Williamson.
Who is your book for, if that's not a self-evident question?
I think when I write, I don't think about who it's for. I think about what the information means to me, and I try to feel it as deeply and passionately as I can. And then I think I've learned as an oral communicator as well as a writer that there's a level on which who listens, who understands, who gets it is in one way none of my business, and another way, to be honest, always a surprise to me. You know, you never know who's going to share your vision and get excited by the same things that you get excited by and moved by the same things you get moved by.
But you have obviously tapped into a wealth of feelings and emotions and empowering that many readers, men and women alike, seem to really identify with.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that. I think that it's not so much that I've tapped into something that other people can relate to. I think I'm tapping into the same thing millions of people are tapping into in their own lives. So I don't think that there's something in me any different than in anyone else. It's just something's going on in this world, and I happen to be one of many people talking about it.
Are you maybe in the role of the facilitator, the person who opens our eyes and says, yes, you're tapping into it too?
I think an oral communicator, I think a writer is a kind of a teacher. Someone once defined art for me as information. I think that anytime you're trying to communicate deeply, you're trying to midwife an awareness in someone else. I once read where Aristotle said, no one learns anything they didn't already know. That's why when you read something or you see a painting or you listen to a song that you love, it's like, I wish I had said that. Because what you're saying on one level is, I knew that. I wish I could have said it. I think Bob Dylan, and I would not be so presumptuous ever as to compare myself to the early or any of the work of Bob Dylan, but I know as a younger person, he used to have that thrilling effect on me, which is, God, he read more clearly into my soul than I've even read into my soul. And that's, of course, what any writer wants to, possibly attain, is
but the irony
going down
is
that deep.
If you sat down at a word processor and said, boy, now I'm going to tap deep into their souls, it wouldn't work that way if you went with that intention. No, because it's not a left-brain process, which comes into really the whole point of the book. It's a non-linear mode that you go into, and in order to have the greatest linear effect. Otherwise, art would be done by formula. Otherwise, there would be graduate schools, and any graduate school could put out a great artist or a writer or something. And for that matter, it's not even about being necessarily a great writer or a great singer. It's about being a passionate writer, a passionate artist. There's something about sincerity behind words and passion behind words and feeling behind words, which is really what creates or fails to create the magic bullet that sails into someone else's heart. That's why so many, even like in college, you'll have some Nobel scholar in some field, and he's teaching there or she's teaching there. Well, that's really wonderful, but that won't necessarily be the person that the students flock to the classroom to hear. Students will flock to a classroom to hear the teacher who is so full of passion about the material. Maybe that person hasn't won the Nobel Prize, but that person is the better teacher. And in A Woman's Worth, what I'm talking about is the nonlinear, passionate, feeling response to life, which is just as important a dimension of human consciousness as is the linear, the scientific, the mechanistic, the scientifically analytical. I'm
I'm a believer, not only as a communicator, but as a woman, as a human being, that we must return the dimension of poetry to our mass consciousness. The poetry must be integrated once again with our intellect, with our reason. And the fact that this century has been so dominated by a mechanistic, in that sense, masculine worldview, has led us to a very, very dangerous place. This has been in some ways a century without heart. And we must reclaim, I believe, that which is the feminine dimension in both men and women, the feminine aspect of consciousness, which is one who listens and surrenders and accepts and receives and feels. It includes a whole variety of resources, the power of our tenderness, the power of our relating to other people in kindness and beneficence.
Has that feminine dimension been anesthetized for so long, though, that it is impossible to wake up?
No, well, first of all, I think that the whole human journey, the importance and the meaning of the human journey is that we do wake up. I don't think there's ever an area where it's impossible to wake up. As a matter of fact, I'm always fascinated by the profundity of fairy tales, and I think that's why in Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, in both of those stories, the wicked Queen wanted to kill Snow White, wanted to kill Sleeping Beauty, but that which is our essential truth can never be completely obliterated, can only be put to sleep. I believe that on the planet there is, at this time, a great awakening. And this includes not only the feminine within us, but all aspect and dimension of consciousness which has been kept down, which has been oppressed, which has been, as you said, anesthetized for so long.
How did you decide which areas you wanted to discuss in this book?
I think that goes back to what you and I were saying before. I think that whatever is in front of you, whatever is the area of your own deeper questioning, because I think that that's really what the role of the writer is. You're not seeking to provide answers so much as you are seeking to facilitate a deeper questioning. And you get closer to the facilitation of more meaningful questions when it's your own questions.
I know these are also the questions that come up. You meet lots of people. You conduct discussion groups. You must, I'm sure, encounter the same questions frequently.
Of course I do. And in this particular book, because of its rather personal nature, I think of this book as somehow the story of me and my girlfriends. But I also think that, as you said, I meet women all over the country and elsewhere whose questions seem to be the same as ours are.
Questions that I would guess, if you were to travel around the world, are probably similar, aren't they?
Oh, Bill, on such a level, I think one of the great facts that we're all awakening to in various ways is that people are the same everywhere. At the dinner of Helen Thomas here in Washington the other night, the dinner honoring her, she told some great stories. I don't know if you heard the speech, and she told this great story about Ronald Reagan, that Ronald Reagan, of course, talked all these years about the evil empire. And then he finally went to Russia and the whole business with Gorbachev and stuff, and he went to Russia and he was so amazed, and he realized that these people could think and could feel and could cry. They were real human beings. So Helen Thomas went up to him and said, President Reagan, do you think if you had gone to Russia 20 years ago, you would have seen that these were real people who think and feel and cry? And he said, no, they've changed. But you see, I was very lucky. When I was 9 years old, my parents took me to Russia and took me to various places like that. And interestingly enough, the Russian people, the Eastern European people, particularly love children. They make such a big deal over children, more than people in the West do. So my experience of Russians as a little girl was people who made more of a fuss over me than I'd ever had a fuss made over me here.
But it must be frustrating on one level to see other societies where women have a larger role in what is that the other societies that aren't as masculinized as ours has been, and you look at we're supposed to be the leaders of the world. This is the finest country in the history of the world, and yet the position that women hold in this society.
Well, things aren't all bad, first of all, and I'm not speaking from a position of thinking that they are, and great strides have been made in this country. The patriarchal thought system which has dominated Western civilization, first of all, it's not about men versus women at all. Patriarchal thought system is conspired. Many women conspire with that. It's not about men holding down women. It's not about we live in a country that holds down women. We want to get past enemy consciousness one way or the other. We simply want to embrace, to me it's not so much about about fighting a consciousness that doesn't work as it's always about embracing one that does work. A woman realizing, regardless of the fact that so much of popular culture tells a woman, and we have been hypnotized, anesthetized, as you were saying, so often we have been hypnotized into, in a way, into believing that our value is determined by our bodies or determined by the age of our bodies, how our bodies look. But instead, as we turn our eyes away from the meaningless meaningless stimulus of the popular culture around us, and we embrace an inner meaning and a spiritual identity, a spirit identification with the power and the glory that we are as women, having been created by God, then I believe we're simply not as vulnerable to the lies of the world. And as we embrace the light, the darkness outside of us simply doesn't have the same kind of effect. I think that's the first part of the process, is for women to embrace the power and the glory within us. No one is going to honor us until we honor ourselves. No one is going to listen to us until we listen to ourselves. The second most important step in this is that we as women support one another. Because so often when a woman stands up in our society, tries to live from her full passion, from her full glory, from the abundance of the passionate person within her, as she tries to retrieve the most feminine aspect of her consciousness, sometimes she will find that women are among the first to shoot her down. So I think that there's a whole reinvestigation of the concept of sisterhood, which is trying to emerge at this time and which is so important. I think that the most important aspects of feminism don't have to do with what happens in social and political legislation, as important as that is. Where you really see the panorama of the emerging goddess consciousness in its dramatic conflict with the old patriarchal order is in a kind of psychosexual dimension that goes on daily in American coffee shops, dining rooms, bedrooms, day in and day out, as a woman tries to say, well, you know, I know what your facts and figures say, I know what your scientific analysis says, I know what linear thinking would say, but I want to tell you what my heart feels about that. Now, she's likely to get all kinds of rolled eyes. She's likely to go, oh, there goes her again. She's been visiting California. She did one of those seminars. Now, she will go through that, and it will make her implode. It will make her break down and want to shut up. However, if there's another woman in the room who, instead of being afraid to speak up on behalf of the other woman because she's afraid she won't appear as attractive as she does, if even one other woman will say, you know, I feel that way too. And I think the way we feel about it in our hearts is every bit as important as the way somebody else thinks about it from the neck up. And if those two stand together and look in each other's eyes and know that this is a big deal going on here, this is a major shift going on here, then the forces of resistance is back off, I got to tell you.
Is that happening in your experience?
Yes, it's happening in my experience. I think everything good is happening. I think that we are living at a time, and this is just one little aspect of the global shifts that are occurring. There is a terrible breakdown of established order in this society. Any thinking person sees it. We are living at a frightening time, at a violent time. And every day you pick up magazines where there are new horrors. Do you know what I'm saying? Today, the horror I was reading about in Vanity Fair magazine had to do with satanic rituals. And I mean, it's just so horrible. At the same time, we must keep our eyes on the fact that as one social order is clearly on breakdown, there's a new one being born, even as we speak. People of beneficence and goodwill. In fact, one of the issues that I've been thinking about a lot recently is people of goodwill, people of beneficence, which means the majority of people in our country have got to stop criticizing and attacking one another, minimize our differences, and realize that just the fact that we are hoping for the same things, we let the fact that we argue over the means to a goal blind us to the power we have inherent in the fact that we agree on the goal. What do we want? We all want the same thing. We want a peaceful society back where we can all walk down the streets and feel good about each other. We want everybody to have a fair chance once again. We want our children to have good educations. We want to feel safe and protected. Instead, we're so busy bitching at one another instead of realizing this childish, petty way that we glorify our differences has got to stop in order that the power of our agreement might have a chance to work the miracles that we want. And that's the same thing with the women who just, if we stop tearing each other down, stop criticizing each other, start blessing each other instead of condemning each other so much, there's nothing we couldn't do in concert with one another. And that is the meaning of our times. The reclamation of the realization that together there's nothing we cannot do, and apart there's nothing we can do.
It's a very forward-looking book, isn't it?
I hope so. I like to look forward, and I see in my own personal life where my biggest weaknesses and my biggest mistakes come from my failure to do that.
What would you like a woman to get out of this book?
I would hope that a woman or a man, because I believe it's a book for men too, I hope that a woman would feel better about being a woman, and I would hope that men would feel better about women. I think that there is a sparkle and an enchantment and a sacred dimension to womanhood that is so obliterated by popular thinking in this country. And I think as we reclaim that mystical princess inside all of us, as we reclaim our lost girl, something extraordinary is happening within individual women and within individual men too. You know, this cannot be a time, in order for us to heal as women, we must avoid at all costs any temptation to bash men. I think men are trying to reclaim their genuine masculinity at this time, and I think as women, we're on a parallel track. Men have said, oh, well, that's great that we got in touch with our feminine side, but we want to be essential men too, and I think women feel the exact same way. And it's very important at this time that we work together and support one another. Women supporting men and feeling like respecting them as the men that the men want to feel they are, and we need the men to help us and support us in feeling like the women that we want to be. And that's what it's about in any area, whether it's the reclamation of our essential masculinity and femininity or any other area. This is a time when we must realize the importance of men taking care of women, women taking care of men taking care of men, women taking care of women, and all of us taking care of the children. If we could keep our eyes on that stuff, the rest of the stuff would start to drop.
Newsweek once named Marianne Williamson one of the 50 most influential baby boomers. She turned 72 earlier this month. She lives in Washington, D.C. Now you can get your copy of A Woman's Worth by Marianne Williamson by tapping the link in our show notes, or by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to us on YouTube, or by visiting our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also hear my 1991 conversation with the author of the seminal book, The Beauty Myth, Naomi Wolf.
Any woman who stands up in public to say there's something wrong here, especially if she calls herself a feminist, as I do, can invariably count on attention being directed at her appearance as a way to undermine what she's saying.
And for a counterpoint to this, my 2003 conversation with anti-feminist Phyllis Schlafly.
All the surveys show that the majority of women do not relate to the word feminism. They do not want to be called feminist. And I think if they look at the feminist movement, they discover it's produced a lot of bitter, unhappy people.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, my conversation with the doctor who in 1975 coined the term near-death experience after his research based on thousands of interviews with people who had just had one. My 1988 conversation with Dr. Raymond Moody.
The idea is instilled in us that death is something so painful and fearful. The patients who come back from these experiences unanimously tell us that after this experience, never again are they afraid of death.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.